I guess you'll be able to confirm that they can see me in the other, see and hear in the other two rooms? Okay. Good evening, everybody. We're here for the March 31st meeting of the District Advisory Council. As you may or may not be aware, there was an executive order from the governor that had allowed school boards and committees governed by certain statutes that are required to meet in person or have an in-person quorum, had allowed us to meet virtually and counted virtual appearances at the meeting towards a quorum. As our governor has, that executive order ended would be the appropriate way to say that. It was not extended, and the state attorney general has rendered an opinion that boards such as ours, or committees such as ours rather, cannot conduct official business unless we have an in-person quorum of 50% plus one of our membership. Unfortunately, tonight we do not have 50% plus one of our membership in attendance, and we will be unable to have an official meeting. However, what we are going to do is have an informational meeting. Those folks of you that are here present are certainly invited to stay, and everyone attending virtually is invited to continue to participate. We will still have the same presentation. We're all separated already into the breakouts. If you're not aware, what we've done this evening to correspond with social distancing guidelines is we have each of our normal breakout groups already separated into their breakout groups. So we have the elementary folks together, the middle school folks together, and the high school folks together. Everybody should be receiving the same information, will be able to see the same presentation, and so what we were going to do is go forward with that on an informational basis. We will still receive a presentation on our code of conduct. We will solicit feedback from both to the degree that we can do so properly in the general session, or certainly throughout the breakout rooms. We'll still solicit feedback. We can still do reports of what that feedback was. We will not be voting or approving any minutes or taking any official action this evening. This is just an informational meeting. So if you choose that you do not want to participate or continue to attend, you are certainly free to go. No repercussions to your school or anyone else. If you choose not to stay, however, we certainly welcome you to stay. I will tell you that I just presented recently to the board. Again, I'm very, very proud of the work that we do as a committee, and that the value of our committee is primarily in the feedback that we give and the change that's comes as a result of it. As a result of our last meeting on the proximity plan for the district, our feedback was taken very, very seriously. And our feedback was different in kind and quality, I will tell you, than the district received from some of the other committees. And as a result of our feedback, the superintendent convened meetings with his top staff members and the leaders of the organization, and they formed a number of specific task force to address the questions and issues that we raised regarding transportation, regarding equity and diversity, regarding some of the questions we had around the grandfathering issue, and some of the other specific topics. They have now formed separate task force teams that are being, if I say this correctly, I should probably let Dr. Spiro do it, but are being led by some of the top staff members to make sure that these types of issues that we raised are being properly addressed and answers are being provided so that eventually they can come back to not only us, but to the district at large and make sure that they can answer those questions about the different issues regarding the various proximity plans. That's something that happened because of all of you folks taking the time and energy to contribute, give feedback, so please feel that your feedback is valued. And even if we can't take votes and formal recommendations tonight, we can still provide that same type of feedback. We have the executive directors for each of the grade level groups in your breakout rooms, as well as, it's my understanding, we have folks that are responsible for the student code of conduct in each one of the breakout rooms. So we'll still be able to capture the same type of feedback and give the same type of information, even if it is not considered an official meeting. So with that said, I'd like to present an opportunity for Board Member Patrica to address our informal informational meeting tonight.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. How are you? That was kind of sad. I know it's late, but what Chair Hertz was saying is so incredibly true. Your presence here, and more importantly, your feedback really, really, really matters. this DAC committee has been the most productive that I have seen in my time at the district, and that includes when I was a parent SAC member and not a school board member. So your presence and your feedback is super important. And to illustrate that, guess what I'm going to talk about in my board update? I'm going to talk about our legislative platform. That's a surprise, right? We have seen significant movement on 2 bills. Senate Bill 86, which is the Bright Futures bill, which is more important to probably the high school breakout group than it is this group, but you guys must be thinking about these things too as your kids progress up. Senate Bill 86 has gone through many, many different changes as a result of feedback that the legislature has received from parents and students. So your feedback matters. When I come here each week and I say, please, if you have a relationship with your legislators, reach out to them, tell them your story, tell them how it impacts you individually, it does matter. And we're seeing that happen with accountability as well. And please correct me if I'm wrong on anything here. It's my understanding that the state of Florida, the Department of Education, has applied for the 95% waiver from the Fed. We cannot offer grace and compassion on those end of school year tests unless we get that waiver from the federal government. So that was the first step that was necessary in order for us to hold our teachers and our students hold them what? Hold them harmless based on the end of year tests. We want the data. We really, really want the data. We want to know where we need to meet each child when he or she enters the classroom at the beginning of next year. But we don't think that teachers and students should be held accountable for those tests, meaning a teacher's evaluation shouldn't be impacted by it, a student's ability to graduate or progress up to the next grade shouldn't be impacted by it, because it's no one's fault that we're living through a global pandemic, right? So continued discussion with your legislators on this important topic will go a long way toward getting us to where we need to be on that issue. Make sense? All right, and the final thing I have for you is a request. Finance Advisory Committee met, and they asked the board to reconsider the recording and public streaming of these committees that we have, these board advisory committees. This is a district advisory council. What happened was somebody public records requested the names, addresses, birth dates, and salaries of every single person that works for the school district of Lee County, and then they placed that information on a social media website. And that it was a public record. We had a legal obligation to turn that information over to the individual, never in a million years imagining that it would be abused in that way. We had a lot of staff who was understandably very concerned that their information was out in the public forum. That led to the Finance Advisory Committee saying, hey, we're not comfortable with every single word we say being recorded and potentially twisted, or a little piece of a meeting taken here and spliced together with a meeting there to make it look like they said something that they never actually said, or statements being taken out of context, that kind of thing. So I have been asked to come to you and ask your opinion on whether you would like to see the meetings continuing to be recorded and live streamed. We can't take a vote, as Chair Hurt said, but you can certainly provide feedback, and maybe perhaps each of the breakout groups could do a straw poll, and in your report at the end, provide me with some feedback to bring back to the board. We good with that? All right. Thank you guys so much for being here tonight. Appreciate it. Thank you.
So with that, Dr. Sparrow, do you have anything you want to add for the good of the order at this time?
Thank you, Chairman Hertz and School Board Member Patrica. Thank you both very much. The only thing I want to add before we begin this evening's presentation, there's one more item that came out of DAC that we have implemented, and one of the comment cards a few meetings back, there were suggestions about doing bilingual training for our families via Zoom. And we worked with our ESOL department, and we are now going to be providing English language training for some of our ELL students whose parents need to have that offer for them via Zoom because they cannot maybe come to the district or go to their child's school. That's another example of a direct impact that our DAC has had in some actionable items. So I just wanted to say thank you, because that came from one of the comment cards that was in the chat box that we had a few meetings ago. So thank you. And that's all I have at this time.
All right, and I'll probably say for the end, I'll make some more comments about meeting in person and meeting virtually. Your executive board did meet and discuss that and talked about finding ways to continue forward with meeting virtually. This was one of our concerns, is that we wouldn't have enough of a quorum. We also talked about the quality and quantity of feedback we've been getting. Although certainly there are folks that would rather meet in person, there are also folks that would rather do this virtually and be able to do this from home. So we have requested of the school board, and the school board is looking into requesting from the state permission to be able to meet virtually and continue in that type of fashion to enable more people to participate. We understand it's hard for especially parents and staff for people to come here at 6 o'clock at night and invest this kind of time, and that people were clearly able to do that more easily through the virtual platform. And that's something also that perhaps we could gather some feedback on in the breakout sessions, if each group would discuss their opinions on meeting in person or virtually going forward. Completely separate, and let me be very clear about this, completely separate and apart from any COVID issues or pandemic issues. We noticed that we felt like overall we just got better participation. I will tell you that our average participation, we were just making quorum in some of our previous meetings prior to the pandemic. We had in-person attendance in January of 2020. If I don't mix these up, I believe it was 53 in January of 2020 and 54 of 54 members of our 100 members in February. I may have mixed those 2 months up. One was 53, one was 54. But that's a far cry from, we've had consistent attendance of 100 members throughout our virtual meetings, literally doubled our attendance. You know, one thing I'll remind you too, that our board requested and got the school board, our school board, to approve virtual attendance at SAC meetings, counting for the school's attendance, and that greatly enabled our district to increase its participation. So I'd ask you in your breakout sessions to also discuss this topic in addition to the student code of conduct. Mr. Erickson, did you have a comment you wanted to add on this issue? The executive board was, the question was the executive board meeting virtually or face-to-face? The executive board was meeting virtually prior to the last meeting. The opinion came out from the Attorney General prior to the executive board's meeting, which was last Monday, 22nd of March, and we met in person with an option for virtual. We did have a quorum for in-person meetings for the executive board, which we attained, and we had one member attend virtually. All right, with that, I think I'm do my best to pronounce this correctly. It's Brian Mangan.
Yes, thank you very much.
Is going to give us the presentation on the student code of conduct. Thank you.
Good evening, members. Thank you for coming out tonight. Appreciate the opportunity to present information about our district student code of conduct, even in this informational session. Our agenda for this evening is an orientation on a couple of topics that would be pertinent for understanding later on in the presentation, some background to how we reached this point in our journey to review our code of conduct and prepare for board presentation. And then the introduction through essential information covers the key aspects of our redesigned code of conduct that was approved last year. Everybody should have a code of conduct at the seat or chair that you sat down at. If not, please talk to one of the facilitators in the room to help you out. But that will be something that will be helpful as I go through the presentation. You can flip through it and kind of get a deeper read or look at some contextual information as I present, because about 100 pages is not going to be something I want to spend hours and hours going over with you all this evening, especially when you're here on your own time. To begin with, our code of conduct, not only is it printed, but for the vast majority of folks, it's available on our school district website, and there's the link for it. As I prepared this presentation and shared it with the executive committee, there is a copy so that if you ever needed to look at it in the minutes or records or from this informational meeting, it's a link right there on our school website. One of the key terms that I'll be discussing tonight is called the SESR, or the School Environmental Safety Incident Reporting System. And this is something that came out of public concern back in the 95-96 school year, and it was developed by the state of Florida to track those incidents and analyze patterns of violent, criminal, and disruptive activity on school campuses. The intent is there to be complete and objective data from which to design interventions and improve the learning environment. So assessor operates at the school, district, and state levels. The school data is collected and sent up to the district, where we bring it all together, and then in turn turn it over to the State Department of Education, where it's compiled and turned into an annual report that is made accessible to the public on the state's website. Where we have been so far, we've had presentations and inputs from these following groups up there. We talked with the American Heart Association in regards to their concern about tobacco use and most notably vaping in schools. So we've received input from them. A couple of other committees at the district for the District Advisory Board, to include the EDAC and Equity, and the Student Advisory Committee last month as well. We've also had meetings with our bargaining units, Talc and Spalk, and our different administrative levels here at the district office and at the building level. So we're here this evening. We also have an upcoming meeting with our assistant principals, which will be all levels, and of course our superintendent's cabinet. If all goes well, our anticipated presentation to the board will be a first reading during the week of April 26th, a second reading during the week of May 10th, and then hopefully approval by the board during the week of May 24th. So that's kind of where we've been at and where we are now and what we're looking forward to as presentations. And you can see that we've tried to reach out to a variety of individuals and organizations in which to gather some feedback in the limited capacity that we have been experiencing this year. Last year we were fortunate to have things like community forums that the board was sponsoring throughout, and we were able to get some feedback there before the pandemic shut us down. This moves us into the Code of Conduct itself. So if you're opening it up and you're starting to move through it, this is lifted wholly from inside of our introduction of the Code of Conduct, and it speaks to why we have a Code of Conduct in the school. Not only is it required by state statute, but it's also something that is formulated to uniform our approach to providing the best learning environment possible. And as any school-based employee will tell you, and anyone down here at the district will tell you, good classroom management, good school management leads to a better or optimal learning environment for our students. And it's one that should be embraced, the diversity and the different cultures that make up our school community, which is reflective of our community at large, with the focus overall on making sure that academic achievement is preeminent, and that we are making sure that all individuals that are working in learning in the school district feel valued, cared for, and respected. Also inside the introduction section are several pieces of information that we felt were important to put up front first for anybody who is encountering our Code of Conduct. To begin with, we have our Statement of Non-Discrimination Policy, which was updated as recently as the fall of 2020 and approved by our board. We also have an avenue for individuals to register their concerns in regards to equity issues. For students, that would go through our Positive Behavior Interventions Director, and for employees, that would go through our Equity and Diversity Office. And their contact information is listed in the Code of Conduct. Our board policy in regards to discrimination grievances are grounded in 4.12 and 1.3. And the thing that we added this year for the first time was the 9 things to know about Title IX, and you'll see a graphic inside the Code of Conduct. The first anticipatory question for everybody this evening is this question. And again, this will be something that will be discussed in the breakout group, but wanted to get people thinking about it early. Are there any other statements or policies that should be part of the introduction? An example would be considering adding Title VI to the introduction section of the Code of Conduct. And what Title VI does in a nutshell is no person in the United States shall, on the ground of race, color, or national origin, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. And so that is something that has been brought up and is being considered for inclusion moving forward for the next Code of Conduct. Our next major section of the Code of Conduct is our rights and responsibilities. Inside of that, it covers 3 major groups. To begin with, it's the authority of school personnel, from the principal to the administrators to our teachers to our support staff to our bus drivers. And it is also grounded in state board rule as well as Florida statute. And so you can look over that at your leisure as I'm discussing this, but it kind of gives the basics of the expectation that teachers and principals and bus drivers are there to maintain, a well-managed environment that promotes learning and safety and respect for all. The next group of individuals that it addresses is our notification of parental rights. And it covers two major areas inside the code. This is not limited to our parent rights, but these are the ones that are highlighted in there. It's the right to inspect their students' records, and also the right to request an exemption from specific curriculum that they might find objectionable based on their own belief systems, and that could be something like HIV or AIDS education. There is a process that's involved, and there's a statement in the bottom of that page that talks about a form that can be provided by any school to any parent so that they can request that their student be exempted and be given an alternative assignment. The largest group and the largest portion of this section is the students' rights and responsibilities. Students have three major rights when they come to school. They have the right to learn, basically to access their free and appropriate public education. They have a right to understand the code of conduct and have access to a paper printed copy. I know I stated before that we put it up on the website, but one of the things we do every year is print out a limited number and send them out to the schools so that any time that anybody might not have access or wish to read one, or if they're there in person at the school and request a copy, it should be provided immediately. Not only is it a copy of in English, but it's also provided in Spanish and Creole as well. And that is true also of our online versions. The students also have a right to respect. There's a list of rights that they have there. It's the right to respect of their opinions, of their beliefs, of their, of their culture, of their background, of their, rights as individuals. That they do have, rights under the First Amendment, so to speak. These are not absolute rights. They are subject to, what is in the best interest of the school at large. It's the balance between the individual and the school. Along with those rights are the students' responsibilities, and we capture them under the 5 R's, and the Code of Conduct goes at length as you flip through it to see those 5 areas that we expect the students to be responsible in order to be not only access their own education, but to allow those other individuals that are at the school to get their education as well. The anticipatory question is, are these rights and responsibilities clear and reasonable? One of the good things that we've heard so far from our student groups that we presented to is an overwhelming response is yes, these are some very clear and reasonable rights and responsibilities, not just for themselves as students, but for their parents, and understanding that the individuals, the adults that run the schools, have those as well. And we're looking for further feedback on that as you look at through the lens of parents and student and school members. That brings us to our next major section of the Code of Conduct, which is very new for us this last year. It's the interventions and corrective actions. It begins with our recognition of model behavior. Too often folks think of the Code of Conduct as a negative document, and so we added in things in there to recognize when students are doing well and how schools can go about that. It is not a finite list. There's a set of examples and things that can be done. And it also recognizes our positive behavior interventions and support program, which has recently seen an exponential growth in the number of schools that are implementing positive behavior interventions and support. And the superintendent, Mr. Bradley, recognized a number of schools late last week in an online streaming presentation. This also covers our social emotional learning, which is a key aspect, and we have seen a greater focus on, and then in any year in memory, especially with the number of issues that have come up as a result of the pandemic and the students having to cope with those never before encountered expectations and issues. The last section of that of the intervention corrective actions is our multi-tiered system of support. MTSS is what it's called shorthand here inside the district and elsewhere in education circles. And what it does is provide frameworks for schools to respond to the vast majority of students, which all students are in Tier 1 or 80%. Inside the code, what you'll notice is there are about 20 suggestions. It's not an absolute list, but it are 20 best practices that schools, parents, students can use to work with all students. Now, not all students are successful, whether it's academically or behaviorally in MTSS, and that's why we have Tier 2, which has an additional 20 strategies and corrective actions to help students to be successful. This usually focuses on approximately 10 to 15% of the student population at a school, and it has more of a small group aspect to it and intervention focus. And then the highest level is Tier 3, which is for the smallest percentage, the 5 to 10% that are really struggling and need individual intensive assistance. There are about 10 examples in there. Again, it's not an absolute list, but it is a foundation. When you put them all together, there's 50 of them, strategies and interventions to help students be more successful. Our anticipatory question for this section is, how else can we celebrate student success? As you represent the schools throughout the entire district, we know that there are great activities going on there which celebrate student success. And if they're happening in isolation, it's good for that school, but if it's a program that can be shared, replicated, duplicated, stolen shamelessly, let's do that. Let's make sure that we're doing what we can to celebrate those students, which is the vast majority of our students who are doing well and every single day that they're in school. And so keep that in mind as we move forward. Our next section is our discipline section. And this is where that CESR information comes into play. To begin with, our discipline section is grounded in school district policy, state statute, and state board rule. And it begins with school violence and threats of violence. There is a zero tolerance standard inside of the state statute, most notably the Gun-Free Schools Act, that we are responsible for in capturing in our code of conduct and making sure it's known and responding accordingly. Our board policy on threats of violence in regards to zero tolerance it's 4.09, and excerpts of that portion of the school board policy are captured in the code for you to look at. Search and seizure, which is always a delicate issue and one that must be addressed in a clear, comprehensive manner, is outlined in Board Policy 4.03, and excerpts from that are also captured in our Code of Conduct. Off-campus felony acts. The vast majority of these involve students in grades 6 through 12. What happens with these is if a student is arrested, there is a notification that is sent to us through the Felony Assistance Notification System, and then we send that out in a confidential manner on email to our principal of those respective schools where that student might be attending. And if it's the arrest, it is strictly for awareness of the principal and those teachers and staff that work directly with the student, counselors, and then their regular classroom teachers. If that arrest turns into a charge, we receive a second notification, and again, the process is the same as disseminating that out. However, if that charge from the state attorney's office involves weapons, drugs, sexual offenses, or battery, the school principal at the secondary level has to make a decision in regards to holding a school-based administrative hearing, bringing the parents in, and determining if those actions by that student will be enough of a disruption if that student is on campus, and we'll have to make a determination if it's warranted to send the student to the Success Academy until the matter is adjudicated. And again, that's going to be an individual case-by-case system, but it would only fall under these four main areas. So while stealing something like a car is serious, it would not be something that would be cause for moving a student to the Success Academy. We express our desire to cooperate with law enforcement, outline our referral process, which affords our students the due process rights that they are guaranteed in state policy, state statute, and board policy as well. Additionally, students that might get in trouble for certain offenses that could have them removed or suspended for a length of time from 8 to 10 days that happen to have a disability that is captured either under an IEP, a 504, or is a suspected disability that is being worked on through the MTSS process. After the school administrator holds a hearing, the manifestation determination review is held, and the process is outlined there in the book as well. And what it does is gives an extra set of guarantee and look at the situation, and if the reaction to the student result of their disability, then the school needs to revisit and come up with a different way to approach the student corrective strategies. There is the 45 interim alternatives educational setting days for any student that has an IEP or a 504 if they are referred to the Success Academy, and that is captured in there. The anticipatory question is not really a question, it's more of a presentation at length, because currently what we have are 3 levels of misconduct that encompasses the 26 assessor violations that are listed here and are denoted by those asterisks 1 through 4 next to the listed offense, and the 19 local codes that the school district of Lee County has developed over the last couple of decades to capture and accurately reflect student misconduct. So currently we are set up along this line, and inside the book there are definitions and corrective strategies listed for all 45 of these offenses. This diagram is right at the end of it, and so it was just easier to show you this and allow you to have the code of conduct to leaf through as you're looking at it. And it covers all offenses that we have, and there are 2 offenses to note in there, that the OMC, the other major classified, is a state assessor offense, and then the other rule violation is a local offense to deal with, as you can well imagine, students sometimes come up with some real creative ways to misbehave, and those 2 violations are used, I hate to use this term, but lack of a better one at my tip of my tongue, it would be a catch-all. What we are looking at is based off of a study of some local school districts here in Southwest Florida and the other 9 that make up the 10 largest school districts in the state of Florida. What we are looking at is moving from 3 levels to 5 levels. And that assessor information I talked about before is the 3rd column from the left on this diagram that I have up on the screen. And a 1 star or 1 asterisk means those are the most severe things that the state of Florida recognizes as an offense by a student. As you notice here, the only one that has a double star is the weapons possession. After looking at these other districts, and especially the ones, the 8 that have 4 or 5 levels, and comparing it, we found that weapons possession was generally considered to be on par with the most severe offenses, and I think that is understandable when you consider a student possibly bringing a firearm to school. As we looked at the other large districts and the ones in our area, Glades County, of note, considers these to all be 0 tolerance offenses, and Brevard County requires mental health services for any offense at a level 5. While Hillsborough County, interestingly enough, follows the assessor model of 1 star or level 1 being the most severe. The rest of the districts, including ourselves, do it the other way, where 1 is the least severe and 3 is the highest as we are currently situated, or 5 would be the highest. So it's just something interesting to note, and this is where we're looking for feedback on. And one of the reasons that we are looking at this is because when you consider these offenses that are up on the screen right now, and then you look at some of the next ones that are about to come up, there may occur to you that there is a difference, and maybe the response by the district or the school should be accordingly with these different levels of severity of offenses. So with that said, looking at the next level, level 4, we have these that are captured there. The one that is added without any asterisks is an off-campus felony. The state doesn't have a code for it, and Lee County has been capturing it for years as a FEL, or off-campus felony. And again, for those 4 individual things that we mentioned before: weapons, sexual offenses, drugs, and battery. Again, Glades County considers these all to be 0 tolerance. Duval County still implements a progression of steps based on the frequency of behavior. It's something Lee County used to do but moved away from a couple of years ago. And I think that it has seen some success in our district, as it has allowed our school administrators to be more flexible and understanding and consider the context of the situation and the individual student, as well as balancing against the overall school environment when working with students and their parents in infractions and what is the correct behavior response. Side note, burglary is a replacement for breaking and entering, although they're still using the code BRK. That's just a side note. I'm using this presentation for a couple different groups, so I wanted to leave that in there. Now we start to get to the largest section of it, the level 3 offenses, or the middle behaviors of concern. As you can see, they're listed there, and again, that lines up with the 3 stars from Cessor. However, you'll also notice this is the first appearance of a number of local codes, from safety and false accusation to forgery and gang-related activities. As we were looking at the information from other districts, came across Hendry County, which uses something called days held in abeyance. Essentially, an example with that would be if a student got in trouble for one of these offenses and received, say, a Saturday school as a consequence, the administrator might tell the parent and the student that if between here Monday and Friday, the student is on great behavior, doesn't get into any more problems, and this problem that they got in trouble for doesn't replicate, we can do away with the Saturday school. So basically holding it in abeyance. If the student is not successful, then the Saturday school is there, and we're not trying to add additional consequences on the student, providing a student an incentive to do better. It is interesting to note that we did see some discrepancies with Brevard, Glades, and Miami-Dade. They felt that disruption on campus, stealing and larceny, and sexual offenses are higher than what Cessor considers them as a level 3. They felt that they were more of a level 4, as the five levels are designed on this draft presentation. Level 2 for us would be the end of the Cessor violations. You can see the top 4 there. We've had quite a response to the concept of alcohol being considered here, but we wanted to try and be as consistent as possible with the Cessor recommendation or identification, and also what we saw elsewhere in the other districts. There were a couple districts that did think that alcohol was more severe and should be on par with drugs, and that's why something that we would like to hear feedback on. And then we'll see additional local codes here as well. Brevard County had a suspension and revocation of network internet access. As a consequence, we captured that towards the back of our book under essential information when we talk about computer use. But it is something that we could consider moving into a corrective strategy. Hillsborough County has something called a reentry plan for any student that's suspended out of school or happens to go to an alternative setting. We have a limited reentry plan that we use with our Success Academy students right now, but it is a concept that we can consider expanding upon. The greatest disagreement that we saw was on the understanding of where disruption and insubordination behaviors should fall. When we looked at these 8 districts that have 4 or 5 levels, this was all over the map. There was no consistent approach to this. Some folks had it a little lower, most folks had it a little bit higher. And so we had to put it somewhere for the purpose of the presentation, so it kind of landed here. Again, not locked in stone, this is a draft, and this is why we're looking for that feedback. But when we look at our data internally, the number of referrals that come across, disruption and insubordination are the highest frequency of the behavior infractions of students at all levels. Our last section would be all local codes, from dress code down to profanity. You have interesting note here would be Brevard County had a series of additional corrective strategies. Some of them might be just a different way of saying what we already have, such as a stay away contract could be considered a behavior contract, as we have it listed right now. But again, in an interest in trying to get as much information possible and to open our minds to additional possibilities and ways of doing business, wanted to add them here for further consideration and feedback. So those would be the 5 levels, and as you get to the breakout section, we would look for some response and some feedback on the 5 levels, whether you think 3 is appropriate, maybe 5, perhaps 4, or perhaps you think that certain infractions should be located at a different point inside the 5 levels if you like the 5 or 4. Getting towards the end of the presentation now, our last section of the Code of Conduct is essential information. Previously, these items were scattered throughout the Code of Conduct, and what we did essentially was to capture them all in the last section and put them alphabetical. A lot of this is stuff that is in board policy, mentioned before, the computer network usage, and also the bring your own device dress code. This is also where we start to see some separation between our 2 codes of conduct. The ones that are for 612 cover driver's license and teen dating and violence abuse, whereas it is not in our pre-K-5 code of conduct for our elementary students. Two things that were added last year at board direction was the mental health instruction passage, information, and public health and safety information, which was very timely considering the pandemic and the board were responding to it. One of the last things that was added new this year was vaping to include ENDS, which is the state's way of calling it the electronic nicotine delivery system. And so that was added this year. I have a quick couple of snapshots up there. Can't really see them on the screen, but inside your codes in front of you, you'll see our quality poster, our graduation requirements, the Fortify Florida information for students, which not only should be in our code of conduct, but posted in schools as well. And then our character education calendar, which is towards the back. So the question here for us to consider is, what else is essential to include in this section? One of the things that we know we need to include moving forward is information about the Hope Scholarship. It's in state statute, and we need to put it in there moving forward with next year. But what else would there need to be in the essential information section? That portion, that kind of concludes the official presentation. Just to remind us, I'm going to pop up the questions that have been asked already, and then there are a couple additional ones that I wanted to mention. As we looked at the 13 other districts, we noticed that 10 of them have one code of conduct. And so the question would be, would it behoove us as a district to move in that direction, have one code of conduct, or should we maintain the two separate ones? There is a state statute that reads that you should have one from elementary and secondary. And so depending on how you interpret that, we have asked our legal department to review that as well. And so we're looking for feedback on that question. And then this is a concept that we also witnessed as we were looking at other school districts, an annual edition or a 3-year edition. And again, not saying we're going to go to, moving from our annual concept, but what we've noticed is that there have been 2 major revisions in about the last 20 years of the Code of Conduct. The first one was back in 2002, and then the one that was done last year. And so it was just a thought, wanted to bring it to our groups and see what type of feedback we got from that. And of course, there is our parking lot or anything else question, because knowing that it's about 100 pages, I did not cover everything in detail, and there might be things that as you were preparing for this meeting and presentation that you wanted to share. So that brings me to the end of the presentation. I would look to the chair or the breakout groups for guidance moving forward in a timeline of how much we want to provide before we reconvene as a larger group.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mangan. I appreciate your presentation this evening. So for our breakout groups, we're going to stay in our informal. Remember, this is informal. You could stay here or not stay here. But for informally, we'll stay in our breakout groups till about 7:15 with the questions that are up there. We do have facilitators in each room from student services. And then also, remember, we're also looking for your opinion facilitators on the recordings of the meetings, as well as how would you like to have the meetings in the future, virtual, face-to-face, or some hybrid. So we'll be in these breakouts till 7:15 for our high school and elementaries that are in the other rooms. If you can have your one representative who will be presenting your offerings of information, have them come down to the main boardroom at 7:15, and that way we can have them present from here. So at this time, I turn it over to the level facilitators. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So we're going to move to our breakout report session, and we already have a wonderful representative here to present, and she looks all ready to go, so I will let her go first.
Hey friends, I'm Amy Jane McWilliam with the high school group, and I'm going to look at the questions there. We didn't feel that there were any other policies or statements that should be included in the introductions. We thought that the rights and responsibilities were clear and reasonable, which we thought it was important, especially for students, to be clear and simple. We thought celebrating student success, we can't forget those kids that are in the tier 3, especially they miss out on other celebrations. So it's important to recognize the gains that they make. Sorry, I ran down here from our room. Let's see. We didn't feel that there was anything else to include in that section. 5 levels or 3 levels. We did talk about how 5 levels would provide that there is a big difference in some of the violations and the consequences. So 5 levels would provide some flexibility. That the sexual assault section needed to be evaluated and elevated. And there needs to be distinctions between racial slurs versus profanity. We were looking at what are the consequences for tier 3, 4, and 5. So that was explained to us that 1 and 2 would be less severe violations as opposed, oh no, don't take those away.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was gonna go to what you were talking. Okay, never mind.
Thank you.
Did it again.
That's helping me. Level 1 and 2 would be less severe violations. 3, 4, 5 would be a bigger difference. We also wanted to be sure that there was consistency with how the violations are leveled, and we felt that the 5 levels would provide that opportunity. We also wanted to be sure that there was some distinction for issues that were, or violations that were caused by mental health issues. We noticed that one local school district had required mental health follow-up. We felt that was important. And we also feel that it's important that pre-K and 5th are separated from grades 6 through 12, just because children's brains and just the level of severity and the imaginations of our middle school and high schoolers compared to our elementary school students. We didn't have enough time to talk about the recording of the programs, although we felt that if they are open to the public and the public can come in person and see them, that there's less reason to record, but we would need to talk about that more to have a vote. And then we took a vote for these meetings. Hybrid meetings had 10 votes, and in-person only had 1, and virtual only had 0. And I believe, 3 years. We voted for a 3-year edition as opposed to a 1-year edition. However, if an issue arises, especially any legislation from the state, that would be addressed as needed and updated, as soon as possible. Lastly, anything else? There was a question that I had. We talked about training. So when we talk about administrative discretion for some of these violations, we just want to make sure that these, the discretionary resolution is fair and equitable, and that there's plenty of training and double eyes on things, and approval process or some sort of policy for administration to follow, just to make sure that this is clear and consistent throughout the district. And that was high school.
Hello, my name is Ken Wolbert, representing the elementary school room. Very quickly, we did our straw poll for recording the meetings or not. Most of the room, 16 people voted yes to continue recording, 3 voted no. But the discussion was had that there are minutes available for these committee meetings. So it's not necessarily maybe not recording them because people can read the minutes and still see them in public. As for the quorums, 10 people in the room voted yes for virtual, none for face-to-face, and 9 for hybrid, so kind of a split room when it comes to those. Some of the things we talked about, any statements or policies that would be part of it. Title VI was mentioned as should that be something that's included. We kind of went away from including Title VI because it is mentioned in the introduction that Title VI is part of the non-discrimination policy. So it wasn't deemed necessary to add the additional text into it, being that it is referenced there. We spent a lot of time on how to celebrate student success. A lot of it was just better communication to the families for success celebrations, such as using school messenger and making them meaningful celebrations. We discussed that a lot of schools have different types of celebrations based on the school, where one school will have bounce houses and magicians come to the school, and another school celebration is here's a bag of popcorn for doing such a great job. So we discussed could there be district-wide programs to celebrate these successes, especially for quarterly achievements, not just at the end of the year. Can we do something quarterly for perfect attendance or for AB Honor Roll that's a district-wide program, not just school-to-school basis? Parents being notified of the celebrations, again, a very low level of parents knowing that something is happening at the school to celebrate and continue that celebration at home. Some ideas where some schools allow their children, for whatever reason, to bring a stuffed animal or a favorite toy to school one day for a party, or schools that have uniforms doing dress-down days for certain achievements, doing that more frequently. And one idea that was brought were teachers calling home for positive reports, splitting up a classroom in 4 weeks, however many students. If you have 20 students, 5 every week, you call home and give the parents a positive report on what their child is doing well, so the parents can celebrate that success at home as well. One thing that was mentioned was there is it would be having a staff behavioral specialist in every school, not just for the full-time ESE schools, that they feel that it would be a big benefit to every school that would have those. Ensuring that support's available for teachers in regards to maintaining the code of conduct, like in regards to when there's a consistently disruptive child in the classroom, does the teacher have enough flexibility or rights and support from the school to handle that kind of situation? We briefly touched on the 3 or 5 levels, and kind of what was heard before. The room seemed to prefer the 5 levels as it provides more flexibility, different levels of accountability and such. We did kind of lean towards a 1-year document, and that was just due to the fact there's an increase in different issues, such as mental health issues are increasing every year. Vaping, which is a newer issue, that's going to increase every year. So being able to come back to that every year seems to be a better idea than if we wait 3 years, it could be too late to handle those kind of situations. One thing was when we're talking about 5 levels, a black and white definitions of why it's so different in each level for the severity of why it's deemed level 1 compared to level 5 and the severity of it, but making sure that those definitions are in black and white and clearly defined for everybody. And that's all we had.
Thank you, Ken.
Hi, I'm Justine Schall. I'll be representing the middle school group. We actually didn't get to the 2 questions that came up in the initial presentation on discussing whether the meeting should be virtual or face-to-face or hybrid, so we don't have an informal vote on that, as well as if the meeting should be recorded or not. So I don't have anything to report there. We did discuss in the introduction section of the Code of Conduct, adding something about recognizing students with disabilities, as well as recognizing students within the LGBTQ community. We had some feedback on weapons during this question, but I don't know if that would be something that would be added into the introduction section or not, but just clarifying a little bit there on some students with pocket knives versus how big something actually is to be considered a weapon. Rights and responsibilities, the majority in our group did feel that this section was clear and reasonable. Celebrating student success. The feedback we got here was having some outdoor areas during lunch, just some extra opportunities for students to be socializing with each other and with their friends. Also possibly providing a matrix or a tier level of rewards for positive behaviors for students to have. For the essential section, We had quite a bit of discussion in this area to add scholarship information to that section, things on the Ben Carson Scholarship as well as the Hope Scholarship, so that that's accessible to students even at a younger age, something to be working for. The effects of tobacco, going into that section, who to go to for questions about the actual code of conduct itself, doing the right thing, our partnership with law enforcement, and then also some information that can be provided to families and students on essential websites. 3 versus 5, is that where we are? Yeah. 3 levels versus 5 levels. So we had a majority vote on this one to have 5 levels, and it just seemed to give more opportunity to separate the granularity in things that students are getting into. One of the topics that came up during this discussion was students defending themselves, so that not necessarily being on the same level as a student who is starting a fight. So we needed to clarify some things on fighting. And then the last one, the 1 versus, 2 separate ones, sorry. 1 versus 2 code of conducts. We voted, the majority of, what was that on ours? I didn't catch that one. It was 2? Okay. Having 2 separate ones there and simplifying the K through 5 one to be maybe including some pictures for younger kids to look at while parents are going over that with them, and simplifying the language a little bit more for them also. And then for the 1 or 3 year code of conduct, we voted on that one informally, and the majority seemed to want a 3 year code of conduct with the opportunity for possible additions of addendums on a yearly basis, and having those sent via email, electronically. And the last one, anything else? Oh, possibly adding the representative, the DAC representative contact information to the code of conduct. Did I miss anything for middle school? Okay, my notes were all over the place. I apologize. Thank you.
I just want to clarify for everybody that any references to voting is a reference to an informal straw poll of just the opinions of the wonderful people who decided to stay here and volunteer and give their opinions, that no official votes or action were taken tonight by this committee. However, everyone's feedback is still very valuable and recognized, and I am certain will have an excellent impact and influence upon the information that staff puts together and gathers and is viewed by our wonderful board liaison, Ms. Patrica, who was here and made her way through apparently several of the different breakout sessions, and certainly, as she always does, reviews these reports in minutes and then works through the appropriate leadership staff to be sure that these types of things are considered. So again, we thank everybody for their time. I'm going to make a couple of requests. I'm going to ask the middle school group to stay for just a couple minutes. We had the benefit of having Mr. Megan sort of facilitate our group, and we didn't jump up and start on that, so he launched right into our presentation. If we could just take a very, very brief, I promise, once we stop tonight, we'll very briefly get the opinion of the middle school group about the 2 questions we were asked about the recording and the in-person. With that, since this is not an official meeting, I won't really request any public comment. I don't know if I have a way to get, I don't know that I do have a way to get good of the order if anybody has any comments on that from the other rooms. So we will skip that for tonight, seeing that no one is here. I will let you know that our next meeting is set for April 28th, 2021. And I drew a blank on our current, do we have the topic set for that one? Do you remember, Ms. Grimm? So I think at this time that was left open, and it may be some of the issues with the end of course and student assessments as well, and what's happening there that the board member Patrica touched on, and we'll get back to you. Our executive committee will meet prior to then. I will tell you that Ms. Patrica and other board members are very focused on this issue of virtual versus in-person and what we do about the quorum, and we'll have more information to you between now and the next meeting. This was something that all sort of happened last week, so there wasn't a lot of time to put all this together. So on behalf of the district, I will, although I'm not an employee and I'm a volunteer, I'll apologize that, you know, we've done our best with the information we had and the time that we had, and I assure you that this is being further looked into, and we'll have a more complete information out to everyone before then. So with that said, I appreciate everybody's participation. in our informal gathering tonight. And I look forward to seeing you one way or another on April 28th. And everybody be safe out there. Thank you very much for your time.